First of all, Norman, welcome back.
Thanks a lot, Richard.
So, tell us a little bit about. I'm sure you've given this spiel before, but tell us a little bit about the book and the thinking behind the book, putting it
I
together.
think, for one thing, about how we have been told that everybody believed there were weapons of mass destruction before the invasion of Iraq, which is the rewriting of history. The anti-war movement was saying there's no evidence. And we also hear, well, everybody thought that it would be plausible to have Joe Biden run for re-election as president. No, many people were screaming at the top of their metaphorical lungs for years before the disastrous debate in the middle of 2024, which includes our team at rootsaction.org that launched Don't Run Joe campaign 18 months before that debate. I think there is that tendency that's very strong in the mass media and mainstream politics to pretend that progressive analysis doesn't matter, that critiques around class don't matter, that the politics of genuine progressive populism is just not popular enough when the polling says the opposite. I know you've worked for many, many years on issues like supporting and enhancing Social Security, how we need enhanced Medicare for all. This stuff polls through the roof. And yet the pretense at the time and then ongoing in retrospect from mass media and the powers that be on Capitol Hill is, we can't do these left ideas because they're not popular. So this is a mythology. And there's also the idea that, well, yes, in retrospect, we saw XYZ, that Biden running for re-election would be a disaster, that maybe Harris shouldn't have been anointed automatically to run, but nobody knew this at the time. Well, I'm sort of leading up to the fact that this book was written in real time between 2016 and just a few weeks ago, especially during the years of 2016 through 2024. And so I make it a point at the start of the book in the introduction to say, this is not hindsight. I didn't go back and edit it. This is what I was writing at the time, week by week. And I think this is important, not to just, not to pat myself on the head. What's important is that progressives, not just commentators, authors, writers, not just people doing media, but activists saw this car crash, this train wreck coming year after year because the leadership of the Democratic Party is aligned with Wall Street and thumbs its nose at the interests and concerns on Main Street.
And we can both do this. Somebody once suggested if I did the same thing, I should call it I was effing right. And I should have suggested that to you. But the fact is, I don't mean to in any way disparage for those of us that have been looking at this for a while from a perspective of, I guess you could describe it different ways in terms of the relationship with the Democratic Party, but a certain objectivity and as well as a certain value system. It's been clear for a while. It's not like nobody warned us, this, and there's been a resistance to retrospectives as well. And that's one of the things I was thinking about reading, let's say, the first third or quarter of your book was, I remember so well after Hillary Clinton lost and everything that was going back and forth, within a couple months of the election, if you say, well, there was too much emphasis on economic, neoliberal solutions, whatever you wanted to say. I'm tired of relitigating the 2016 election. Remember that? Which, first of all, we never litigated it, so you can't relitigate. But secondly, when you don't win, it's always struck me that, if you didn't have that perception beforehand that this might cause you to lose, you ought to do a kind of assessment and inventory and say, what did we do wrong? That's not, instead we were, some of us were treated like a nuisance for trying to do that work. And I'm wondering how often you've reflected on that.
Yeah, it's a repetition compulsion disorder where, we're like a taxi driver in New York City, stereotypically. You just don't look in the rearview mirror, just keep going, and hopefully you won't crash into anything. In the book, I quote from an autopsy that Roots Action did in 2017 about the Hillary Clinton disaster. And 8 years later, by the way, that's online at democraticautopsy.org. And now you fast forward to two presidential election cycles. And in many ways, if you took out the name Hillary Clinton and you put in Kamala Harris, it's the same critique. It's the same problem. It's the same repetition that is coming from the so-called leadership of the party. And it's really crystallized by something that Chuck Schumer said back in 2016. I quoted in the book. He said smugly, well, for every vote we lose in eastern Pennsylvania for Hillary Clinton among the poorer people of color, we'll pick up two in the suburbs in western Pennsylvania. Well, how did that work out? And it was the identical attitude that in the closing weeks of the Kamala Harris campaign in 2024, we were hearing, oh, we're going to go after the moderate suburban voters. We're going to go after the Republicans who don't like Trump. We're going to take Liz Cheney around and we'll scoop up those votes. And really, if the leadership of the Democratic Party is so arm's length from its base and then turns around and says, gee, we didn't get the turnout. Well, it's mystifying what's not mysterious. And that's when you shaft the base of your party, when you tell them only rhetorically that you have their back and you're really not fighting for them. Well, there's a quote that I use in The Blue Road to Trump Hell from Bernie Sanders. And it was hours after the election was called against Kamala Harris. And he said, it's no surprise that the working class would abandon the Democratic Party after the Democratic Party abandoned the working class. And I know you have worked very closely with Bernie Sanders. You were his main chief speechwriter in the 2016 campaign. And I don't know who wrote this one, maybe it was Bernie, but I also quote it where he said years ago, let's face it, he said, there are people in the Democratic Party leadership who don't mind being on the Titanic as long as they have first-class seats.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and that's something. It kind of gets me to as a lead-in to the purpose of the book, the intent of your book, Blue Road, Norman, which is I've written, you've written about the fact that. I mean, in the nation, I think I compared the institutional Democratic Party to a corporation, an organization that has its own imperatives, right? There are thousands upon thousands of people in the Democratic Party orbit who depend upon billionaire and corporate contributions, large contributions that fund campaigns, that fund campaign consultants, that fund policy advisors, think tanks. There's this enormous nexus of people who would rather lose to a Donald Trump than to win with a Bernie Sanders who wouldn't, might cut off their revenue flow that keeps them alive. So that gets me to, I guess, if we're going to review in real time what we knew, which is, in a sense what your book does, I think, and remind ourselves of everything that went wrong as it went wrong. And as we, you and others tried to raise a warning flag, what do we hope that will motivate people to do? What's the desired outcome?
Yeah, that's something I addressed at the outset in the book, that it's not only about getting clarity about what happened in the past. It's about understanding how we can prevent past disasters from being replicated in the future. And it's very specific. Do we want the Republicans to retain Congress in 2026? Well, if it's the same attitude and priorities and the spending focus and messaging from the Democratic Party leadership as in the past, then we're not going to get the turnout that we need. And there's been this very facile attitude that Hillary Clinton had, that Joe Biden had, and also Kamala Harris, basically that Donald Trump is so terrible that all we have to do is mainly talk about how terrible he is and people will vote for us. Well, I don't know what the math would be, but can you beat a negative times a negative and get a positive? I don't think that generally works. And we've seen, like it or not, and this is the history of the Democratic Party and presidential elections, economy. And there are many other issues, but people are generally driven by what they see as so-called pocketbook issues. There's the Orwell saying, those who control the past control the future, those who control the present control the past, or something like that. And we're seeing that again and again. So the Blue Road to Trump Hell is a way of saying, yes, this sort of neoliberalism, this affinity with corporate power, this refusal to fight the power of huge corporations and the wealthy, that is what paved the way for Donald Trump twice to go into the White House. And that has to change. And that means energizing from the base and changing the politics of the party.
And I think that's a great summary, Norman. And I think the other element of it is that when you base essentially your entire campaign around how awful Donald Trump is, I do believe that there's a kind of energy that shifts the energy to Trump. And when people are disaffected with elites and disaffected with the system, as they rightfully, understandably are, and they say, oh, look, all these elite people, and not just Democrats, but the fact that they brought in a Liz Cheney, a John Kasich from Ohio, whoever it might be, if all these elite people who have ignored us all these years hate him, hey, this guy may, deserve my vote. I hate the way things are now, so what the heck? And I think that was a factor here and continues to be. Don't you?
Yeah, it's sort of a feeling, and it's got leveled. I mean, the so-called low information voters, I think, share it to a large degree, is that there's this chess game being played way above us, and it's time to kick over the board. We just don't like it. Now, that was a terrible mistake by the electorate in 2016 and 2024, and we have basically, we can say, a fascistic politics coming out of the Oval Office, controlling the executive and legislative branches, largely controlling, not entirely, but the highest up you go in the judicial branch, up to the Supreme Court, mostly holding sway there too. So this is where a big needle has to be threaded in a very concerted and organizing way. On the one hand, we might have people listening to us right now, Richard, who say, well, this guy's a fascist. Why are we talking about the Democratic Party? Because that's the way to stop him electorally. So just going along to get along with the so-called leadership of the Chuck Schumers and the Hakeem Jeffries, that's a prescription largely, predictably, for more disaster. So that has to be fought. At the same time, there are some people who have said, and this was true in 2016 and 2024, including many who lived in swing states, the hell with them. I hate both of these parties. They're all pigs. And then so they're going to stay home, so to speak, not vote in the presidential race, or they vote for Jill Stein or something like that. Well, that's a disaster too. That's sort of this fantasy world, this kind of imagining, wishful thinking that doesn't comport with the real world. I mean, if you want to fight the fascists, then you don't want them to win elections. And only hallucinations will tell us that you're going to elect a president who is not a Republican and not a Democrat. It just to sort of wind up this little soapbox oration here, in 40 years, the Green Party has never come close to electing one member of Congress. And that ought to tell us something, that, like it or not, and I don't like it, the future of fighting fascism and the future of progressive politics in this country at the federal electoral level, I'm not talking about municipalities, I'm talking about Congress and the presidency, we are entwined with the Democratic Party. And so we'd better fight like hell to change it.
Well, that's persuasive, Norman. I will tell you that there are a lot of people listening who will make certain counter arguments that we should explore. Okay, and by the way, I didn't vote for Kamala Harris in 2024, but look, in my case,
By the way, I live in California. I didn't vote for her either.
oh, okay, there you go. First of all, obviously, for both of us, it wasn't going to change the outcome. I now live in Maryland, which is always
Yeah, they're blue. They're totally blue states. Yeah.
yeah, and except for governorship, which is a whole other conversation. Then, but then there one thing that I think changed. Well, let me go at it a different way. For one thing, I think it's important to talk to all voters from a position of respect, right? And here I'm not addressing you so much as many Democrats, rank and file Democrats, as well as electeds, who have spoken for years now to Green voters with contempt and blame. And I don't think you win anybody over. And again, I'm not saying you.
Yeah, it's not about contempt or blame. It's about efficacy. It's about let's think, let's analyze, let's be clear, and not be in fantasy world.
Yeah, but I think that's left a scar on people, on Green Party voters, that the years of abuse that they've taken.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm tough on politicians. Maybe it's because I've worked on campaigns, but you know what? You're in a sales job. You didn't make the sale, you effed up. And of course, activists also like us, have to decide, and journalists and so on, writers, observers like us, have to make we're called upon to make our recommendations. And certainly there's a lot of recommendation for not having a Trump as president. He clearly is imposing fascism. I don't challenge that for a moment, but it's a tough argument to make, especially now after Gaza, I think, on the national level, and especially after what went along with Gaza with the active participation of Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer, which is the suppression of freedom of speech on campuses and elsewhere around the issue of Palestine.
No doubt. Absolutely. So that's right. And people, for understandable emotional reasons, and as they say, in most states we're not swing states, why vote for Kamala Harris? Of course, I agree. How bad does it have to get with domestic repression before people say that, no, we don't conflate the two parties? We don't pretend that the Joe Biden treatment of the people in this country, the poor people, I mean, SNAP and food and so many other examples, we could spend the hours. How bad would it have to get before people recognize that we're in the danger of fascism in this country? So how bad would it have to get? If it's not bad enough now, I just can't imagine how bad it would have to get before people say, it really would be better to have a garden variety, even Democrat in the White House, than the fascists we have running the executive and legislative branches now. I just think it's sort of self-evident. And marginal thinking is great in literature. I just don't think it works in politics. That doesn't in any way, in the slightest, get the Democratic Party leadership off the hook, because it's abysmal. And it's doing two things that are, well, many things that are horrific. One is it's aiding and abetting de facto the consolidation of fascist power in the federal government, but it also is laying out and continuing to reinforce a politics that does not challenge the kind of corporatocracy we have that is so terrible for people's lives, let alone the militarism. And this is where, again, I think we need to make a distinction. I mean, it was hard to believe that anybody in the White House could be worse than Biden in assisting genocide, direct complicity. I mean, let's face it, Biden should be at The Hague, right behind Netanyahu. There's no question. And it's hard to find, except for issues like climate, a lot of huge difference between the two parties in terms of foreign policy. But domestic policy, it would be preposterous to say that there's no significant difference. There's a huge significant difference. Just look at the Supreme Court decisions and how the votes are between who was appointed by Democrats and Republicans. Just for instance, let alone nutrition and healthcare and so many other issues. Again, not to let Democrats off the hook for their neoliberal failure to enact enhanced Medicare for all and free public college and so many other programs that we as progressives need to fight for. To get back to the Blue Road to Trump hell, I do want to say that we have a capacity now in this country. Every day, millions and millions of people are getting news and information from progressive sources. And that is crucial. I mean, we're talking about, no, this isn't hindsight. People could go back 1, 2, 3, 5 years and see clips from the 0 hour, and we were saying things then. It's not hindsight. So we have been developing not enough, but to counter at least partly as much as we can this really right-wing Zionist pro-corporate craziness taking over outfits like CBS News now, we can more and more sustain programs like this, the 0 hour, others. Don't give your money to NPR when you can give it to the 0 hour, give it to Pacifica Radio, give it to Democracy Now! And other outlets. So that's important at that level. And then we also have to combine it with action and organizing. And that's been a shortage of resourcial, if that's the term, use of resources to pair the infrastructure of progressive media with we've got to organize. And Indivisible is not some radical left group. Credit where due, though, they have organized these No Kings Days, have been very important and so forth. And frankly, a lot of the YouTube shows, and I'm gonna call out what's the one that is so popular, The Young Turks. I mean, it becomes entertainment. No, folks, this is not entertainment. The Blue Road to Trump Hell, title of my book, is chosen because the Blue Road to Trump Hell was paved by people not only going along with the Democratic Party so-called leadership, but also seeing politics as a passive entertainment activity. And that has to change as a cultural thing. And I think the left and progressives have improved in the capacity to say, no, this isn't just something that you watch, it's something that you change. But we've got to increase that cultural change so that we see not just as a platitude, but reality. If we don't change history, it's going to crush us.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you make the case very well. And it to me, what it brings up is, and maybe now we can pivot to the future and the conclusion of the book. But it brings up to me something that's a little bit intangible, but important, I think, which is, I think millions of good-hearted, committed, passionate people have kind of retrofitted their vision to the Democratic Party because, as it exists, because it's the only vehicle that exists for them. And to me, that's why I wrote a piece called, Left Populists, well, the headline they gave it was Left Populists Unshackle Your Imaginations. To me, people do need community. They need solidarity. They need to be part of something. That's part of what makes us human. But to me, the way to work with the Democratic Party is, like the Bible said of the world, be in it, but not of it, right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
That if, first of all, there are the cases like Nebraska where an independent got 45% of the vote. Bernie's endorsed him. I think now the Democratic Party is going to come to him and endorse him the next time around because
it could be the kiss of death in Nebraska. I don't know if you want it.
I know it really could. But it seems to me that's where people like us come in. That's where movement activists come in. That's where it's not enough, as so many Democratic politicians have, including privately in conversations and so on that I've had here in DC. It's not enough to scold people for not voting Democratic. We need to say to people, you want a better world, we want a better world. So if we suggest that you vote Democratic, it's not because we think that's the end state. It's
Right.
because, and you've expressed this in other conversations we've had very eloquently, Norma, but it's because to build the world we need to build, which looks different from this one, pretty freaking different. To
Yeah.
build that world, we have to preserve those freedoms or remnants of freedoms we have, which means that it doesn't mean listening to all the lectures about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It means use the good as a tool and discard it when you can move closer to the perfect. Do you get what I'm driving at?
Yeah, 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 very much. And there should be zero scolding. There should be solidarity. And there should be,
Exactly.
hey, the future is with, pardon the saying, the working class. I mean, that's where it is. The middle class, working class, however you want to define it, low income people, the poor, the near poor, those who are struggling, which is most of the country, one way or the other. So it has to be frankly, an anti-rich, anti-corporate politics where no, it's not fine to have billionaires. Bernie has said billionaires shouldn't exist. Well,
Right.
that's anathema. That's a sin to corporate media and politics. One of the points that I wanted to raise, which is very much, I think, Richard, what you're referring to, is that the traditional electoral politics view, including some of the best, quote unquote, liberal elected officials, is that social movements should be a subset of electoral campaigns.
Exactly.
And it's
Right.
backwards. Electoral campaigns should and must be a subset of social movements. And when you look at it historically, that actually is what happened. You know, whether it was FDR in 1932 and 36, the labor organizing, the activism really lifted that boat. It wasn't that the elected officials lifted the boat of movements, it's the other way around. And so that is really a different sort of a language and lexicon that is just rejected. I mean, and the Democratic Party is led by people who, as you referred to a few minutes ago, they're sinecure, they have friends, and they often themselves, they're getting huge consultant fees. And grassroots organizing is really not where it's at for them. One of the things I talk about in the book is that this pathetic dynamic went on where in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, for example, people in low and moderate income areas were begging for campaign materials. And meanwhile, there was all this money being sunk into what do they call it, the collar counties around Philadelphia, where appeal to the affluent, suburban, often Republican people to turn away from Donald Trump. Well, this is ridiculous. Every time we hear, is it a turnout election? Oh, yes, it's a turnout election. But the behavior of the people running the party is it's not a turnout election from their base. You might say it's a turn away your base so you can suck up to people who are not voting Democrat usually anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's exactly right. And let's close with this then, maybe if you have a minute, as a way to kind of tie
Sure.
it together, which is you write at the end of the book about Zohran Mamdani. And, he's a fascinating, obviously, you can't universalize any one politician, nor do I think movements should invest themselves 100% in any politician, even such a talented one. But the fact is, Zohran Mamdani won in part because, a large part, because he was first and foremost associated with the movement. In his case, it was the Democratic Socialists of America. It doesn't mean it always has to be, but he had a ready-made
Yeah.
set of allies, volunteer supporters, advisors out of that, and it helped him immensely. It scared mainstream Republicans. You write about. We all remember Chuck Schumer's refusal to endorse him, and which, of course, is bitter irony to those of us who've been lectured about vote blue no matter who for so many
Yeah.
years. And then the speaker, I'm sorry, the minority leader in the Senate won't. I call it vote blue, and we'll tell you who, which has been, Democrat. As I think it's what happened to Bernie, but um, now he's mayor elect, and which has been, the best news in a while. Now we have a self-described democratic socialist, as mayor-elect in Seattle as well. Not again, not to say, there will be different labels and different identities in different parts of the country for working people's agenda. But you wrote recently, and it almost seems like it could be an appendix to the book or an addendum to the book, about what everybody's talking about now, which is Mamdani's meeting with Donald Trump. And I'd love for you to summarize your thoughts about that briefly in a way that sort of ties it into what we've been talking about here, too.
Yeah, I use the metaphor that just because a rattlesnake purrs, it doesn't mean that it isn't a rattlesnake. And so Donald Trump, we know, is, to put it mildly, mercurial, much more extreme than that. He makes stuff up as he goes along, and you can't depend on anything. And I point out that if he can denounce vitriolically Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his foot soldiers of the MAGA forces, on a dime and spin, he can certainly do that to Mamdani. And I'm sure that Mamdani clearly knows that this guy is a nut. The president is a nut, but it's a tactical thing. And so I was really pleased that right after that Oval Office meeting, the mayor-elect Mamdani goes on Meet the Press and says, yes, he is a fascist. I mean, so here's a guy who is so rooted in a movement that he doesn't change what he has to say because it's true. And he's not going to be a windsock. That's why so many people have, one reason, so enthusiastically supported Bernie Sanders over the years. You can go from one decade to the next. It's derision, and there's going to be derision towards the new mayor of New York from corporate media. Oh, it says the same thing all the time. That's the point, because the problems are the same and they have to be changed. Overall, I think that this is about flexibility, and the cliche is govern in prose after having campaigned in poetry, but we want to have as deep and poetic governance as possible, and practicality, feet on the ground, eyes on the visionary horizon. So I think that's, it's a challenge ahead, and we are not dead, us progressives, as fascistic as this regime is. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's daunting, but it's our potential future that's worth fighting for. I do want to mention that I did give a lot of thought to, is there a point in doing this book, the real-time writing in 10 years primarily, and looking ahead from there? And one of the aspects I'm most glad about is that after writing 14 books, this one's free.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to set it up so that from the very start, this book is free. PDF, ebook, all people have to do is to be able to go online. And I want to invite people to do that. Just go online to blueroad.info. That's blueroad.info. And various formats are there for you to read the entire book, including more than 10 wonderful cartoons by the Pulitzer Prize winning progressive cartoonist Matt Worker. It was just fabulous. If people have been seeing progressive cartooning for decades, he's been there. And so I encourage folks to also go and look at the cartoons. They look great on a screen of any sort. And one more aspect, activism is really the ultimate engine for the social changes we want. And I love working with colleagues at rootsaction.org, and you can sign up for activism there. Just go to rootsaction.org.
Well, there are a million other things I could ask you about, Norman, but they'll have to wait for another time. But okay, it's blueroad.info. Yeah, people should definitely check out the book. And you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been, right?
Yeah, really.
And as always, great to talk to you. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Hey, thank you, Richard.
We depend on your support here at the 0 Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.